The summer of 1932 hung over the small town of Millstone, Kansas, like a fever that refused a break. The land was tired, cracked by drought and choked by dust that rose with every weary gust of wind. The sky, vast and pitiless, glowed gold in the evenings, as though mocking the parched earth below. Beneath that golden sky lived Samuel Hayes, a boy of 12 who already looked older than his years. His father, John Hayes, was once a proud farmer, a man who believed that sweat could coax miracles from soil. But pride doesn't grow corn. By the time Samuel was 10, the farm had withered under debt and drought alike. The Great Depression had taken the little hope left in Millstone. The Hayes family, John, his quiet wife Martha, Samuel, and his younger sister Annie, survived on canned beans, borrowed credit, and Martha's prayers whispered into the wind. Samuel learned early that dreams were dangerous things. They could make a man forget how empty his pockets were. Yet, even as he watched his father crumble under failure, something restless stirred inside him. At night, when the air cooled and the sky shimmered with stars, Samuel would climb onto the roof of their creaking farmhouse and stare eastward. The horizon glowed faintly in that direction, a promise of cities he'd only read about in torn magazines. Chicago, New York, Boston. Places where men weren't trapped by dust and memory. "Sam," his mother would call softly from below. "Come down now. You'll catch your death out there." He'd nod, pretending to obey, but stay a little longer, his eyes fixed on that golden stretch of sky, where the sun sank like a coin into a faraway ocean. When John Hayes lost a farm that winter, it broke something inside him. He stopped shaving, stopped speaking, and finally stopped getting out of bed. Martha took in laundry from the neighbors, her hands raw and red in the freezing water. Samuel tried to help by working odd jobs, cleaning barns, delivering milk, mending fences, but the pay was barely enough to keep them fed. One night, Samuel overheard his parents arguing. His father's voice, once deep and steady, trembled. "You think there's something out there for him, Martha? There's nothing out there. The world don't care for boys like Sam." And his mother's quiet reply, "Maybe not, but if the world don't care for him, he'll just have to make it care." Those words branded themselves into Samuel's heart. By 16, Samuel was tall, lean, and sharp-eyed. He had the look of someone always calculating, always thinking 3 steps ahead. He'd long since stopped believing in luck. The only thing he trusted was his will. His father, hollow and bitter, warned him that ambition was a dangerous thing. "It's fire, boy," he said once, staring at the cold stove. "Fire will warm you, but it'll burn you down just the same." Samuel only smiled faintly. "Maybe, but it beats freezing to death." In 1938, when his mother fell ill and the doctor's bills piled up, Samuel decided to leave Millstone. There was no ceremony, no farewell party, just the sound of a train whistle and the sight of his mother's face pressed against the window pane, pale and tearful. His father didn't come to the station. "Write when you can," Martha whispered, pressing a small silver cross into his palm. "And don't forget where you come from." "I won't," Samuel promised. But even as he said it, he felt the pull of the horizon and knew it was a lie. The train carried him east through endless plains, past towns swallowed by dust, past people who looked just like the ones he left behind, tired, small, defeated. He swore he'd never end up like them. He was meant for something more. He could feel it in his bones. Chicago greeted him with noise and smoke, and opportunity dressed as chaos. The city's skyline rose like a crown against the morning light. The streets were alive with shouting vendors, rattling trolleys, and the sharp smell of ambition. Here, no one cared who your father was, only how hard you could fight for a chance. Samuel took a job sweeping floors in a shoe factory. The pay was miserable, but he worked with a quiet ferocity that drew notice. He watched everything: how the foremen spoke to men, how the owners made deals, how money moved like a secret current beneath the surface. At night, he read newspapers left behind in the break room, devouring stories of men who'd built empires from nothing. He studied them as others might study scripture. Sometimes he'd walk to the shore of Lake Michigan and stare at the water, golden under the setting sun. That same sky, the same color as the one back in Millstone, hung above him, as if reminding him that no matter how far he ran, the past followed quietly behind. One evening, as he sat by the water's edge, a man in a dark coat stopped beside him. He was older, well-dressed, with a cigarette between his fingers. "You look like you're thinking too much for your own good, kid," the man said. Samuel looked up, wary, just trying to figure things out. The man smiled faintly. "That's what this city's built on. Men try and figure things out. Name's Walter Grayson. I run a small logistics business down by the river. You look like you've got more sense than most of the boys I hire." Samuel hesitated. "I don't have much experience." "Experience is overrated," Walter said. "Ambition's the real currency. You've got that look." That night, Samuel walked back to his small rented room with a folded business card in his pocket and a strange new fire in his chest. He didn't know then that meeting Walter Grayson would set him on a path that glittered like gold and cut like glass. Back in Millstone, the Hayes farmhouse fell silent. His father died the next spring, alone in his bed. His mother wrote him letters, though Samuel rarely replied. "You must be busy," she'd write kindly, "but I hope you're eating well. I hope you still carry that cross I gave you." He did, though it now sat forgotten in a drawer, gathering dust. Every step Samuel took away from Millstone, every dollar he earned, every handshake in a smoke-filled office, it all seemed to whisper the same promise. You're becoming somebody. And yet, beneath that promise, there was always the echo of his father's warning. Fire will warm you, but it'll burn you down just the same. Chicago, 1941. The world was on edge, and the city pulsed like a restless heart. War raged across oceans, but here the streets beat to the rhythm of commerce and ambition. Men worked, drank, fought, and dreamed. Money moved quietly through alleys and boardrooms alike, and Samuel Hayes had learned how to follow it. It had been 3 years since that meeting by the lakeshore. Walter Grayson's small logistics business turned out to be something far more intricate, a web of freight contracts, backdoor deals, and under-the-table trades. It wasn't illegal, exactly, not all of it, but it wasn't clean either. Samuel learned fast how to read men's intentions by the set of their eyes, how to speak just enough truth to sound honest, and how to make others believe they needed him. Grayson liked the boy's mind. "You've got instinct," he often said, swirling a glass of whiskey. "You think before you talk, and you don't flinch at the sight of dirty hands. You'll go far if you don't grow a conscience." Samuel would smile. "A conscience doesn't pay the bills, Mr. Grayson." By 21, Samuel wasn't sweeping factory floors anymore. He wore pressed suits and silk ties, smoked expensive cigarettes, and dined in places where waiters knew his name. He'd climbed fast, too fast, and in every reflection, in every shop window or polished glass, he saw a man who was no longer the dusty farm boy from Kansas. Yet sometimes, late at night, when the city quieted, he'd wake to the memory of his mother's voice, faint and trembling. "Don't forget where you come from." He'd roll over, stare at the ceiling, and whisper to himself, "I haven't. I'm just not going back." Walter Grayson was more than a mentor. He was a mirror of what Samuel might one day become. But Grayson was aging, and his empire was beginning to show cracks. Rivals circled like vultures. "You've got youth," he told Samuel one evening in the dim light of his office. "Use it before the world takes it from you. The city's changing. The big boys are moving in from New York, and they're hungry." That was the night Samuel met Clara Winslow. She entered the office like a storm in silk. The daughter of a shipping magnate from New York, Clara was beautiful in a way that unsettled people. Her beauty had purpose. Her red lips curved like secrets, and her laughter carried the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. Walter rose at once. "Miss Winslow, my apologies for the wait. This is my associate, Samuel Hayes." Clara turned her gaze on him, sharp, assessing, amused. "Associate? You look far too young to be anyone's associate." Samuel smiled, unbothered. That's what they said about Alexander before he conquered the world. Her laughter lingered. "So you're ambitious. Isn't everyone?" "Not everyone admits it." That was their beginning, a meeting woven with curiosity and challenge. Over the weeks that followed, Clara became a fixture in Samuel's world. She claimed to be helping Grayson broker a shipping deal. But Samuel sensed she had motives of her own. They dined together, argued, flirted. She asked about his past, and he deflected with charm. "One day," she said once over dinner, "you'll have to stop hiding behind your ambition and tell me who you really are." He leaned closer. "When I find out, I'll let you know." Clara was unlike anyone he'd known. She was a contradiction. Fragile in appearance, ruthless in spirit. She spoke of art, of New York theaters, of Europe before the war, a world of champagne and chandeliers that Samuel had only ever glimpsed in photographs. She made him feel both small and infinite. Around her, he wanted to be more, richer, sharper, unshakable. Walter Grayson saw it, too, and didn't approve. "She's poison, Sam," he warned. "Beautiful, yes, but the kind that eats from the inside out." Samuel chuckled. "You sound jealous." "I'm experienced," Walter corrected. "You think you can control her, but men like you never control women like her. You just dance until she decides to stop the music." Samuel didn't listen. He was already too deep. He and Clara became inseparable, their names whispered together in Chicago's upper circles. She introduced him to new worlds, the opera, the Ritz, political fundraisers where men wore smiles like masks. Through her connections, Samuel met city officials, investors, men who could turn opportunity into fortune overnight. The line between business and pleasure blurred until he couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Then came the deal, the one that would make his name. A government contract to transport steel and machinery for the war effort. It was the kind of deal that could lift a man from the middle ranks to the golden top. But it was risky, full of hidden clauses and unspoken expectations. Grayson wanted no part of it. "Too many eyes," he said. "You take that deal, you'll owe men who don't forget debts." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Then I'll just make sure I pay them back twice over." Clara encouraged him. "This is your moment," she said, tracing a finger along the rim of her glass. "You've worked for men like Grayson long enough. Why be their protege when you could be their equal?" She knew exactly which string to pull: pride. And Samuel's pride had long outgrown his caution. Within 6 months, he'd signed the papers, taken control of the deal, and made a fortune. He bought Grayson out his own contracts, smiling through the old man's disappointment. "It's not personal," Samuel said softly. Grayson studied him with tired eyes. "Everything's personal, son. You just don't know it yet." That winter, the newspapers hailed Samuel Hayes as one of Chicago's youngest business prodigies, a self-made man who had turned logistics into gold. He bought a penthouse overlooking the city, furnished it with imported art, and filled it with laughter and light. And beside him in every photograph was Clara Winslow, her smile as flawless as her diamonds. But beneath the glamour, shadows were gathering. Whispers spread through the industry: missing shipments, falsified records, officials paid under the table. Samuel brushed it off. "All business is dirt under its nails," he told Clara one night. "You can't build anything without getting your hands dirty." She laughed, though her eyes lingered on him strangely. "Just make sure you're the one holding the shovel." By 1943, the war was nearing its end, and Samuel's empire was nearing its peak. He was invited to Washington to discuss national contracts. He dined with senators. He sent money home to his mother, though his letters were short and rare. "I'm doing well," he'd write. "You don't need to worry anymore." He never mentioned Clara. He never mentioned the sleepless nights or the whispers in back rooms. One night, as snow fell against the city lights, Grayson came to see him. Older now, his coat frayed, his expression grave. "You're playing with fire, Sam," he said quietly. "The kind that doesn't go out easy." Samuel smirked. "I learn from the best." "No, you learn from the worst parts of me. You've forgotten the rest." There was silence between them, heavy with unspoken truth. Grayson sighed. "That girl, she'll love you only as long as you're winning. When the tide turns, she'll be the first to swim away." Samuel said nothing. But later that night, he found himself staring out at the city, watching the snow fall on the gold-lit streets below. He thought of Millstone, of the dust, of his mother's voice. For a moment, He felt the weight of everything he'd left behind. Then Clara came up behind him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and whispered, "What are you thinking about?" He turned, smiled, and lied, "Nothing." But deep down he knew. Somewhere, the golden door he'd stepped through was beginning to close. By 1945, the city of Chicago was ablaze with reconstruction and celebration. The war overseas had ended, and the streets rang with the sounds of victory. Jazz spilling from smoky clubs, taxis honking in impatient rhythms, and the laughter of men and women who had survived years of uncertainty. Samuel Hayes, now 26, stood at the pinnacle of his ambition. He had earned a name whispered in boardrooms, admired and feared in equal measure, and his empire stretched across shipping lines, logistics, and wartime contracts. Yet with every success, the edges of his moral compass began to blur. Samuel's penthouse, perched high above Lake Michigan, had become a monument to achievement. Expensive rugs covered polished floors, chandeliers reflected the glow of city lights, and walls were lined with paintings of European masters he had never met but admired through galleries and print. Yet beneath the glittering surface, tension simmered. The very traits that had propelled him upward, pride, cunning, ambition, now strained the foundations of his life. Clara Winslow had become inseparable from his world. Their partnership, at first flirtatious and strategic, had hardened into a union of convenience and shared appetite for influence. She managed the social side of Samuel's empire, gala invitations, political dinners, and fundraisers, each orchestrated with meticulous grace. Yet there was something in her laughter, a sharpness, almost predatory, that unsettled him in quiet moments. The red silk dress she wore one evening, reflecting light like a warning signal, reminded him more of a storm than a warmth. "You've grown too comfortable, Sam," Clara said one evening as they looked over the city from their terrace. Snow blanketed the streets, softening the sharp edges of commerce below. Comfort makes men predictable, and predictable men get eaten alive. Samuel turned to her, the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. "I'm not comfortable. I'm careful." Clara smiled, faint and knowing. "Careful is good for old men." "You're not old, Sam. You're too young to be careful. You're young enough to make mistakes that can crown you king or destroy you." Her words lingered in his mind long after she left for her own apartment, her perfume clinging to the night air like a promise and a threat intertwined. Samuel's rise had been meteoric, but he could feel the precariousness beneath him. Every handshake, every deal, every signature was both a ladder and a knife, supporting him while threatening to cut him down. Business prospered. Samuel had learned to charm politicians, to appease rival businessmen, and to recognize the subtle cues of fear and ambition in his employees. His fortune grew exponentially, but with wealth came temptation, and with power came moral compromise. Contracts were manipulated. Shipping manifests were doctored. Officials turned a blind eye. Samuel told himself it was all necessary, a small bending of rules to navigate the crooked corridors of a city rebuilt by greed and opportunity. Yet the lines blurred. Samuel's conscience, one of faint guide in the darkness of Millstone, now whispered inconsistently. He began rationalizing deceit as strategy, manipulation as leadership, and ambition as duty. The boy who once climbed rooftops in Kansas, staring at the horizon and dreaming of a life beyond dust and debt, had become a man who measured life in profit margins and applause. Amid the success, Samuel remained aware of the subtle cracks forming in his relationship with Clara. Their partnership was strong publicly, but privately, small fissures began to appear. She began to question his loyalty not only to her, but to the principles they had once claimed to share. "Sometimes I wonder if you love power more than me," she said, her tone both teasing and sharp. Samuel brushed it off. "Power is what protects us, Clara. Without it, we have nothing." "But power can't love you back," she said softly, leaving him to contemplate the truth he refused to face. One winter evening, a letter arrived from Millstone. His mother's handwriting, fragile but unmistakable, brought a pang of memory and regret. She wrote of the farm, now completely abandoned, of neighbors lost to years, of Annie's small family struggling to make ends meet. "Samuel," she wrote, "remember that wealth without heart is a lonely inheritance. Don't let the world teach you to forget who you are." He folded the letter slowly, staring out over the golden city lights. It reminded him of that Kansas horizon, of the dust, of the simple prayers whispered under a sky that stretched endlessly. He tucked the letter into a drawer and didn't speak of it again. It was during this period that Samuel met Victor Langley, a sharp-tongued lawyer with connections to both city politics and federal contracts. Victor offered a new avenue to expand Samuel's empire, but the price was ethical compromise, bribery, manipulation of records, and a quiet erasure of inconvenient truths. Samuel hesitated at first, remembering his mother's warning, but ambition gnawed at the edges of his caution. Clara, ever the strategist, encouraged him. "This is the way to become untouchable," she whispered one night, sitting close, her hand tracing the outline of his jaw. "Don't let sentiment tie your hands. Men who hesitate are men who lose." Samuel agreed. He signed the contracts, made the deals, and watched as his empire grew to levels he had only dreamed of from Millstone. He had everything: wealth, status, influence, and a partner who mirrored his ambition. Yet in the quiet hours, when the city was asleep beneath the same golden sky, he sometimes felt a hollow echo where satisfaction should have been. The cracks deepened when Clara began to assert more control over decisions he once made alone. She was charming, persuasive, and clever, but Samuel noticed a shift. She seemed to delight in reminding him that she, too, could manipulate deals, charm officials, and extract loyalty. Pride battled fear in his chest. Pride in his achievements, fear that it allowed his empire to become something that no longer belonged solely to him. The turning point came at a lavish winter gala in 1946. Politicians and businessmen mingled under glittering chandeliers, sipping champagne and whispering deals that could change the city's fortunes. Samuel gave a speech praising ambition, hard work, and loyalty, while Clara flowed beside him, radiant and enigmatic. Yet in the audience sat men who were quietly plotting, competitors, rivals, and those who resented the meteoric rise of a boy from Kansas. Samuel felt the first real brush of paranoia. Eyes lingered too long. Conversations paused when he approached, and subtle threats, veiled as pleasantries, reminded him that no matter how high he rose, the world beneath him remained unpredictable. He realized then that success was not a shield. It was a mirror, reflecting both his triumphs and his vulnerabilities. As the night wore on, Clara leaned close, her breath warm against his ear. "The higher you climb, Sam, the farther you fall," she whispered. "Just remember, when it happens, I'll be waiting, either to catch you or to leave you behind." Samuel laughed, a little too loudly, but deep inside, a chill ran through him. She had never been a mere companion. She had always been a warning. And perhaps, he thought, he had been too blinded by ambition to see it. By the end of that year, Samuel Hayes was at the apex of his career, celebrated, envied, and feared. Yet beneath the glittering surface, beneath the applause and the champagne, there was unease, tension, and a quiet knowledge that the higher the sky, the farther the fall. The golden horizon stretched endlessly before him, beautiful and merciless, a constant reminder that ambition without caution is a fire that will consume everything it touches. And beneath it all, Samuel felt the faint echo of the boy from Millstone, staring at the horizon, wondering whether the price of his dreams would one day demand more than he could pay. Kindly subscribe to our channel and watch part 2 for a thrilling conclusion of the story.